The snow came in sideways that November, and I almost missed her completely. I was hammering the last loose board on the porch when I heard the horse. A sound no horse should make in that kind of cold. Distressed, short, desperate. I set the hammer down and walked around the side of the cabin, and that's when I saw her. She was standing in the tree line, maybe 40 feet from me, holding the reins of a paint horse that was favoring its right foreleg. She wasn't moving, just watching me the way wild things watch ya before they decide whether you're a threat. Her hair was loose and wet from the snow. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders that wasn't doing nearly enough work against the wind. I didn't say anything right away. I'd learned a long time ago that the first words out of your mouth in a situation like that set the whole tone of what comes after. I just looked at the horse's leg, and I looked at her face, and then I looked back at the horse. "That leg needs tending," I said finally. She didn't respond. "Your fire go out?" It was the only reason I could think of for her being on this mountain in a November storm, this far from the reservation, alone. She was Apache. I'd known Apache women before, not well, not personally, but enough to know that being here was not a casual thing for her. Something had brought her to the edge of my tree line and made her stop. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "My fire went out." 3 words, flat, not a request. Just the truth of the situation, laid down between us like a stone. "You're welcome to mine," I said. I turned and walked back to the porch, leaving the door of the decision open. I didn't look back. If she followed, she followed. If she didn't, I'd still bring the horse in before it went lame. By the time I got the coffee pot back on the stove, I heard her boots on the porch steps. "My name is Caleb Horn. I want you to understand who I was before I tell you who I became, because none of this makes sense without that. I had been a man who stopped expecting things. Not from bitterness, at least. That's what I told myself. More like a slow surrender to the particular shape of my life. I was 38 years old. I'd run cattle for 11 years on land that wasn't mine. Saved enough to buy 40 acres of mountain, nothing in the New Mexico territory, and built a one-room cabin with my own 2 hands. I had a mule named Descartes, a rifle I trusted, a coffee habit that bordered on a medical condition, and nothing else. No wife, no children, no plans that extended past winter. I had not been unkind to women. I want that said plainly. I had known women, and I had respected them, and I had once loved one. Her name was Clara, and she went to Denver with a man who had better prospects and a full set of teeth, and I did not blame her. Loneliness was a thing I had made a kind of peace with. Like a neighbor you don't particularly like, but have decided not to fight. So when the Apache woman walked through my door with snow on her blanket and a horse that needed tending, I was not in a condition anyone would have described as ready. She stood just inside the door and looked around the cabin. Not nervous, measuring, like she was cataloging what was there and what wasn't. There was one bed. I want to be clear about the layout because it matters later. 1 room. A cook stove in the corner. A table with 2 chairs, which I had optimistically put in, despite eating alone for 3 years. A chest for tools and clothes. 1 bed against the far wall, with a real quilt on it that a woman in Santa Fe had sold me because she said I looked like I needed something soft in my life. She looked at the bed. I said, "I'll sleep by the stove. I've done it before." She looked at me. "I'm not going to," I started. "I know," she said. And the way she said it told me she knew, and that my saying it was unnecessary, and that she did not require reassurance from me about my own character. It was a very efficient communication. 4 words, and she'd already taught me something about how she moved through the world. I put my coat back on and went out to tend her horse. The paint was a young mare, 3 or 4 years at most. Good horse. She'd picked up a stone in her frog, the tender part of the hoof, and the cold and the going had made it worse. I got the stone out, cleaned the wound with the antiseptic I kept for the mule, packed the hoof with a poultice of pine pitch and lard, that an old Comanche horseman had shown me years ago, and wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth. The mare stood quietly through all of it, which told me she was well-handled and trusted people. I brought her into the lean-to beside the cabin, with Descartes, who regarded her with the supreme indifference only mules can achieve. When I came back inside, the woman had fed the stove without being asked, and there was color in the cabin again. The orange gold of a proper fire pushing back against the dark. She was sitting in one of the two chairs, with her wet blanket draped over the other, and she was looking at her hands in her lap. I hung my coat. I filled 2 cups with coffee. I set one in front of her without asking if she wanted it. She picked it up. "Your horse will be fine," I said. "She needs a few days of rest on that leg." The stone hadn't gone deep. She nodded slowly. Something in her shoulders changed. Not visibly, but I felt it the way you feel a temperature change before you can name it. Relief, I thought. She had been carrying that particular worry without showing it, and now she set it down. "My name is Caleb," I said. She was quiet long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then, Nizoni. "That means beautiful," I said, because I knew a little, not much, of the language. She looked at me steadily. "It means walking in beauty," she corrected. "There is a difference." "There is," I agreed. "I'm sorry," she considered me. "You know some of our words." "A few. I spent 2 winters near the reservation when I was younger, working for a rancher near the border. Old man named Espinoza. His wife was Mescalero." I paused. I was young and I listened more than I talked. She seemed to find this acceptable. We did not talk much that first night. I made beans and cornbread. It was what I had, and she ate with the focused attention of someone who has been cold and hungry for longer than just today. I didn't ask. People eat the way they eat when they're truly hungry, and there's a privacy too that you shouldn't disturb. After we ate, I pulled my bedroll off the chest and made a place for myself by the stove. She watched me do this. "I won't take your bed," she said. "It's my bed to give," I said. "And the stove is warmer than the bed anyway." I'm not being generous, I'm being practical. This was not entirely true, but it gave her a way to accept without it being charity, and I had the impression that charity was a thing she would refuse. She slept. I know because her breathing changed, went deeper and slower, evened out, within maybe 10 minutes. She was exhausted in the particular way that comes from being alert for too long. Whatever had brought her out in that storm, it had cost her. I lay by the stove and listened to the wind and tried not to think too carefully about the fact that there was a woman sleeping in my bed 8 feet away. I was not entirely successful. In the morning, the snow was still coming. I woke before her, or so I thought. But when I sat up, she was already at the window, standing with her back to me, watching the white nothing outside. She had her blanket around her shoulders again, but she'd finger-combed her hair, and it was dark and straight and reached almost to her waist. "How long has your fire been out?" I asked. She turned. In the morning light, I could see her face more clearly than I had the night before. She was, I'm going to say this plainly, a beautiful woman. Not in any way that required announcement. The kind of beautiful that simply is. The way a particular mountain is beautiful, without effort or performance. High cheekbones. Dark eyes that were taking everything in. A mouth that I had the distinct sense was more accustomed to seriousness than to smiling, but would be extraordinary when it smiled. 3 days, she said. 3 days in this cold. "I know how to keep warm," she said. It wasn't defensive. Just a fact. "What happened to your fire?" She turned back to the window. "A man came. From the ranching family to the east. He wanted the land I was on. He said it was his. He burned my shelter." I sat with that for a moment. I knew the family she meant. Caldwells. 3rd-generation cattlemen who had decided that manifest destiny was still in operation and that any land not actively defended by a man with a gun was land up for acquisition. "You have a right to that land," I said. "The reservation boundary." "The reservation boundary," she said, And there was something in her voice that was not quite bitterness and not quite sorrow, but was the exact texture of a person who has lived long enough with an injustice to have stopped expecting anyone to fix it. I understood. The injustice was real, and the law was unreliable, and she was here, in my cabin, because the world had not arranged itself around her safety. "You can stay here until the storm passes," I said, "and then we'll figure out the rest." She looked at me. There was a question in her eyes that she wasn't asking. "I have no interest in the Caldwells or their opinions," I said. "And I have a rifle, and I know how to use it." Something shifted in her expression. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was something more complicated. The particular look of a person who has been survived by her own strength for so long that an offer of help lands in a strange place, not quite comfortable, not quite unwelcome. "You don't know me," she said. "No," I agreed, "but your horse trusts you." That's a recommendation I take seriously. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. "But it was in the neighborhood. The storm kept us there for 4 days. I want to be careful how I describe those 4 days, because I don't want to make them sound like something they weren't. And I also don't want to undersell what they were. We did not fall in love the way people do in stories, all at once, like a window breaking. It was nothing like that. It was more like the way a fire builds from a single coal. Slow, requiring attention, requiring the right conditions, requiring someone to keep feeding it and not walk away. On the second day, she helped me fix a leak in the roof from inside, handing me shingles through the hatch while I crouched in the cold and hammered. She did this efficiently and without ceremony, and when it was done, she made coffee without asking and handed me a cup. That was the moment, actually. I know it sounds like nothing. A cup of coffee. But there was something in the way she did it. No performance, no self-consciousness, just a simple act of noticing that I needed something and providing it. That moved something in me I hadn't known was still capable of being moved. On the third day, she told me about her son. I hadn't known she had one. He was 11 years old, staying with her sister on the eastern edge of the reservation while the Caldwells burned her shelter and the winter came in. She was out here because she had been trying to secure their winter supply, to bring back what they needed before the snow. And she had miscalculated how fast the storm would come. "He has his phases," she said. She said it simply, the way you say something true. No invitation to ask about the father, and I didn't. Some doors are shown to you and not open to you. I knew the difference. "He sounds like a good boy," I said. Because she had said this about him. That he was good, that he was serious, that he made her laugh sometimes in ways she hadn't expected. "He is," she said, and the way she said it. Absolute, unqualified. That's what love actually sounds like. Not the performed kind, the real kind. "We'll get you back to him," I said. "Soon as the snow lets up." She looked at the fire for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You're a different kind of man." "From what?" "From most." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to a thing is to hold it carefully and not try to add to it. On the fourth day, the snow stopped. The world outside was white and still and blinding. Nizoni's mare's leg was healing well. I'd checked it twice a day, and the inflammation was down. She could travel carefully on the packed snow. We loaded what I had: flour, dried meat, a tin of coffee, 2 wool blankets I could spare, onto the mare. Nizoni took the supplies with a directness that was by now familiar to me. Not quite thankfulness, not quite pride. Something in between that was entirely her own. She stood at the edge of the porch, ready to go, and she turned and looked at me. There was something she wanted to say. I could feel it. The weight of it, the hesitation, which was unusual for her because she was not generally a hesitant person. "When the spring comes," she said finally, "my son will need to learn. There are things a man should know how to do. With horses, with tools." I looked at her. "I'm not asking for charity," she said. Her voice was careful and precise. I would work in exchange. I know things that might be useful to you. You know medicine, I said. I'd watched her 3 nights ago when I developed a headache that threatened to split my skull. She'd made a compress from materials she'd found in my kitchen that she combined in a way I hadn't known was possible. And the headache was gone within an hour. Among other things, she said, I looked out at the mountain, white and vast and cold and beautiful. Spring is a few months off, I said. Yes. That's a long time to think about an arrangement like that. She met my eyes. Unless, I said, choosing my words with the particular care of a man walking on new ice, you and your boy wanted to spend the winter closer. There's room in the lean-to. I could build out a proper shelter from it. Weatherproof. I did it once before, I know how. I paused. The Caldwells won't come onto this land. I can promise you that. She was quiet. That's not charity either, I said. Honestly, I've been meaning to build that shelter for 2 years and kept not doing it. You'd be doing me a service. The corner of her mouth moved again. Farther this time. You are a very bad liar, she said. Yes, I agreed. She was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough that I felt the cold working through my coat. Then she said, I will think about it. She mounted the mare and started down the mountain. I watched her go, small against all that white, moving steadily, unhurried, the horse's breath of making clouds in the still air. Halfway to the tree line, she stopped. She didn't turn around. She just stopped. Then she turned around. Caleb, she called. Yeah, I have thought about it. I felt something in my chest that I had no precise word for. A warmth, maybe, or the end of a coldness I had stopped noticing. Your son, I called back. What's his name? Ahanu, she said. It means he laughs. That's a good name. Yes, she said. She looked at me a moment longer. Start building. She turned the mare and continued down the mountain, and I stood there on the porch in the cold until she disappeared into the trees. And then I stood there a little longer because I needed a moment before I could do anything practical. Then I went into the cabin and drank the last of the coffee, and then I put on my heavier coat, and I went to the lean-to and looked at it the way a man looks at something he is about to transform. Ahanu arrived on the 1st of December, sitting in front of his mother on the mare like he owned the mountain. He had her eyes, that precise, measuring quality, and a mouth that tilted easily toward laughter. And within 4 days, he had decided that Descartes, the mule, was his personal responsibility, and that I needed to be taught at least 3 things I was apparently doing wrong. He was not wrong. I built the shelter from the lean-to, proper walls, a separate cook stove I sourced from a man in town who owed me a favor, 2 windows, a real door that locked. Nizoni made it a home in ways I couldn't have anticipated. A woven mat that covered the cold floor, dried plants hung in the rafters that I slowly learned the names and uses of, small precise arrangements of objects that made the space feel inhabited by a person with a whole interior life. We shared meals. We worked alongside each other in the comfortable rhythm of people who know each other's pace. I taught Ahanu what I knew about horses and carpentry and how to read the mountain's weather by the way the clouds sat on the peaks. She taught me what she knew about plants and medicines and the way the land here worked. Information she carried like a living library, passed down and precise and detailed in ways that humbled me. I want to be honest about what happened between Nizoni and me. And I want to be honest about how slowly it happened. Because the slowness is the whole truth of it. We were careful with each other. This was a conscious thing on both sides, I think. A mutual decision arrived at without discussion. What she had survived was not my business to know fully, and what I had been before was not something I advertised. We were just 2 people in proximity, and the proximity was good, and we were in no hurry to name it. But things build, small things. The way she handed me coffee in the morning with a directness that was also somehow tender. The way I left the best chair angled toward the light because she liked to sew in the afternoons. The evenings where Ahanu would fall asleep early and we would sit by the fire and talk. Quietly, easily, in the way of people who have gotten past the performance of conversation and can just speak. She laughed on a Wednesday in January. I don't mean she had never laughed before, but this was different. I had said something ridiculous about Descartes, and she laughed with her whole face, sudden and unguarded, and for a moment she looked completely different, and completely the same. And I thought, oh, this is who she is underneath all the careful. I tried to be sensible about it. I told myself I was a 40-year-old man who had spent 3 years alone on a mountain and was probably attributing significance to nothing. But I was not attributing significance to nothing. In February, a man from the Caldwell family came. Young one, not the patriarch, one of the sons. He rode up to the cabin in the morning, and I met him on the porch with the rifle. Not aimed, but visible. He had the look of a man who had been sent to do a thing he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to do. "We heard there were Apache on the mountain," he said. "There's a woman and a child living on my land with my permission," I said. "That's not your concern." "My father." "Your father burned a woman's shelter and drove her off land she had a right to in the middle of winter," I said. "I suggest to your father that he think very carefully before he sends anyone up this mountain again, because I am a patient man except when I'm not." He looked at me, young eyes assessing whether I meant it. I meant it. He left. Nizoni had watched from the window. When I came back inside, she looked at me in a way I didn't entirely know how to interpret. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. He'll tell his father." "His father can come and have the same conversation," I said. "I've got more ammunition." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why?" I thought about the honest answer to that. "Because it was right," I said, "and because—" I stopped. She waited. "Because you're here," I said, "and that matters to me." The silence between us then had a different quality than other silences. Charged, maybe. Or just honest. Sometimes honesty lands like weight. She crossed the room slowly and stood in front of me, and she reached up and put her hand against my face. Just that, her palm against my cheek, and looked at me for a long moment. I didn't move. "Caleb," she said, and then nothing after it, just my name, but the way she said it made it enough. "Yeah," I said, "I'm going to stay. Past winter." Something in my chest that I had been holding for months, carefully, like a thing that might break, unlocked. "Good," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She lowered her hand slowly. She went back to the table where she'd been working. She sat down and picked up her sewing and did not look at me. But there was something in her posture, a small softness, a settling. That was entirely new. I went back to the stove. I made coffee. I brought her a cup. She took it without looking up. But when her fingers touched mine for a moment around the cup, she didn't hurry to pull them away. Spring came the way it always does in the high country, not all at once, but in arguments. Cold days and warm days, fighting each other for weeks. The snow retreating and advancing like a negotiation. The aspens went pale green, then full green. The creek below the cabin came back to life, and Ahanu spent every morning trying to catch things in it. Nizoni had a garden by April. I don't know when she planned it or where she found the knowledge of this particular soil. She just began, methodically, and the earth gave back what she put in. By June, there were things growing in neat rows that I had never thought to grow, and the cabin smelled different in the evenings. Better. Caldwell didn't come back. Other things did. A neighbor from 3 miles down the mountain, a Mexican rancher named Fuentes, who came by in March and brought goat cheese and accepted coffee and treated Nizoni with the exact naturalness of a man who saw the world as it was. A circuit preacher who came through in May and stayed the night, and in the morning held a brief service on the porch that Ahanu attended with intense seriousness, and I attended with my hat in my hand. Life has a way of building itself when you stop trying to keep it small. I won't tell you there was a ceremony. There wasn't, not in any official sense. What happened was this. One evening in June, late after Ahanu was asleep, We were sitting outside on the porch because the night was warm, and the stars were the kind of stars you only get at elevation. And Nizoni was quiet, the way she got quiet when she was thinking something through. "In my tradition," she said finally, "a man and a woman who live together and work together and have chosen each other, they are together. There isn't always a ceremony. Sometimes it's just the choice." I looked at her. "Are you asking me something?" I said. "I'm telling you something," she said, "and I'm letting you respond." "Then yes," I said. "I didn't complicate it. Whatever it means in your tradition or in any tradition, yes." She looked out at the mountains in the dark. Then she leaned, just slightly, just enough, against my shoulder. I put my arm around her. She let me. We sat like that for a long time. The stars moved in their slow arc, and the creek talked to itself below, and somewhere in the aspens something rustled and went still. Her weight against my side was warm and real and solid, and she fit there the way things fit when they're in the right place. I had come to this mountain expecting nothing. I had built my small life around the absence of expectation, and I had been, if not content, then at least honest about what I had. What I had now was something else. Something I didn't have adequate words for, not because the words didn't exist, but because the thing itself was larger than any single word could hold. It was morning coffee and sissenpling plants in the rafters, and a boy who laughed and was teaching my mule to follow commands I had never managed. It was a woman who walked in beauty and meant it precisely, who gave things directly and received them the same way, who had brought warmth back into a cabin that had been cold for a long time. "Nizoni," I said quietly. I'm glad your fire went out." She was still for a moment. Then against my shoulder I felt her shake, once, twice, with silent laughter. "So am I," she said. "Caleb, so am I."